I never expected to inherit a farm. At 28, I was a software engineer living in Chicago, about as far from agricultural life as you could get. But when great-grandpa Henry passed away at 96, he left his 160-acre Iowa farm to me, much to the surprise of my entire family. The will reading was awkward. My Uncle Jim, who had been farming the adjacent property for 30 years, clearly expected to inherit the land. My father, Henry's grandson, seemed equally puzzled by the decision, but the lawyer was clear. Henry Jameson had left the farm, the house, and all its contents to his great-grandson Jake, me. He always said you had the curiosity to appreciate what he'd built, my grandmother explained later. Even as a little boy, you asked more questions about the farm than anyone else. I remembered those childhood summers, following great-grandpa around the property as he showed me every corner of the land. He would tell stories about the early days, about building the farm from nothing during the Depression, about the challenges and triumphs that shaped the property. The farmhouse was exactly as I remembered it, a two-story white clapboard structure with a wraparound porch and green shutters. The barn, weathered gray by decades of Iowa weather, stood sentinel behind the house, surrounded by outbuildings that had seen better days. Standing in the farmyard for the first time as the owner, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just property, it was legacy. Every building, every fence post, every acre represented decades of hard work and determination. I had taken a leave of absence from my job to figure out what to do with the place. The obvious choice was to sell it to Uncle Jim, who had already made an offer. But something held me back. Great-grandpa had chosen me for a reason, and I owed it to his memory to understand what that reason was. The first week was spent going through the house, sorting through 80 years of accumulated possessions and memories. Chapter 2. Exploring the property. After a week of organizing the house, I decided to explore the property more thoroughly. I had memories of childhood adventures in the barn and outbuildings, but I wanted to see everything with adult eyes, to understand the full scope of what great-grandpa had built. The barn was massive, built in the 1920s, with hand-hewn beams and traditional mortise and tenon construction. Inside, I found old farm equipment, some dating back to the 1940s and 1950s. There were tools I couldn't identify, spare parts for machinery that no longer existed, and boxes of receipts and records that chronicled decades of farming operations. Behind the barn, the property extended into a wooded area that I barely remembered from childhood. Great-grandpa had always steered us away from that section, claiming it was too overgrown and dangerous for children. Now, as an adult, I was curious about what lay beyond the tree line. The area was indeed overgrown, with volunteer trees and brush that had been left untended for years. But as I pushed through the undergrowth, I could see evidence of previous activity: old fence posts, the remnants of what might have been a road, and strange mounds in the earth that suggested something had been buried. I made a mental note to come back with proper tools to clear the area. There was something intriguing about this forgotten corner of the property, something that called to the same curiosity that had apparently impressed great-grandpa all those years ago. That evening, I called my grandmother to ask about the wooded area behind the barn. "Oh, that old section," she said, her voice carrying a note of something I couldn't quite identify. "Your great-grandfather never liked people poking around back there. Said it was just old junk and not worth bothering with." But her tone suggested there was more to the story. Great-grandpa had been many things, but he was never one to leave valuable property unused without good reason. I decided that tomorrow I would return with a shovel and see what secrets the overgrown area might reveal. Chapter 3. The Discovery. Armed with a shovel, pruning shears, and a sense of adventure, I returned to the wooded area behind the barn. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect for outdoor work. I started by clearing the smaller brush and saplings, working my way systematically through the overgrown section. After 2 hours of cutting and clearing, the area began to reveal its secrets. What I had taken for natural mounds were clearly man-made. The earth had been deliberately piled and shaped, then left to be reclaimed by nature over the decades. I chose the largest mound and began to dig. The soil was soft and rich, easy to work with the shovel. About 3 feet down, my blade struck something hard and metallic. The sound rang out clearly in the quiet morning air, definitely not a rock or root. Excitement building, I expanded the hole, digging carefully around whatever I had found. Gradually, a curved metal surface emerged from the earth. It was painted, though faded and rusted, in what appeared to be green and yellow, the classic colors of John Deere equipment. As I continued digging, more of the object became visible. It was clearly a piece of farm machinery, but it was buried so completely that it must have been intentionally hidden. Who buries a perfectly good piece of equipment, and why? By noon, I had exposed enough of the object to identify it as a tractor, an old one based on the design and construction. The front wheels were visible, along with part of the engine compartment and the distinctive grille that marked it as a John Deere. I paused in my digging, wiping sweat from my forehead and trying to make sense of what I had found. This wasn't just any old tractor abandoned and forgotten. Someone had taken considerable effort to bury it completely, to hide it from view. The question was why. I took photos with my phone and continued digging, determined to uncover the entire machine and solve this mystery that Great-Grandpa had left behind. Chapter 4. Uncovering the Past. The excavation took the better part of 3 days. Working alone, I carefully dug around the entire tractor, taking care not to damage anything that might provide clues about its history. What emerged was a 1942 John Deere Model B, a classic two-cylinder tractor that had been the backbone of American agriculture during World War II. Despite being buried for decades, the tractor was in remarkably good condition. Someone had taken care to prepare it for long-term storage. The engine had been drained of fluids, the metal surfaces had been coated with grease to prevent rust, and the entire machine had been wrapped in canvas before burial. This wasn't the hasty burial of something unwanted. This was the careful preservation of something valuable, something that someone intended to recover someday. I found the serial number on the engine block and used my phone to research it online. The tractor had been manufactured in 1942 at the John Deere factory in Waterloo, Iowa, just 60 miles from where I was standing. According to the records I could find, it had been sold to a dealer in Cedar Falls in the spring of 1942. But the most intriguing discovery came when I cleaned the dirt from a small metal plate riveted to the dashboard. Engraved in simple block letters were the words, "Property of H. Jameson, 1942. H. Jameson, Henry Jameson, my great-grandfather." This was his tractor, purchased new in 1942 when he was just 26 years old. But why had he buried it, and when? I spent the evening researching 1942 John Deere tractors, learning about their specifications and their role in wartime agriculture. These machines had been crucial to maintaining food production, while so many farm workers were overseas fighting in World War II. The more I learned, the more questions I had. This tractor represented a significant investment for a young farmer in 1942. It would have been one of his most valuable possessions. What could have happened to make him bury it so carefully and leave it hidden for over 80 years? Chapter 5. Searching for Clues. Determined to understand the mystery of the buried tractor, I returned to the farmhouse to search for any documents or records that might explain Great-Grandpa's actions. I had already gone through most of the obvious places, but now I was looking for anything related to 1942 or the early war years. In the basement, behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines, I found a wooden crate filled with papers and photographs. Most were routine farm records, receipts, tax documents, correspondence with equipment dealers, but at the bottom of the crate, wrapped in oilcloth, I discovered something extraordinary. It was a leather-bound journal, the kind used for daily record-keeping. The cover was embossed with 1942 in gold letters. Inside, in Great-Grandpa's careful handwriting, was a day-by-day account of that pivotal year. The early entries were routine: weather observations, planting schedule, equipment maintenance notes. But as I read through the spring and summer entries, a story began to emerge that I had never heard from any family member. May 15, 1942. Bought the new John Deere today. Cost more than I wanted to spend, but with Tom and Bill both enlisted, I need the machine to work the extra acres. Sarah worries about the debt, but I know this tractor will pay for itself. Tom and Bill. I had never heard those names in family stories. Who were they? June 3, 1942. Letter from Tom. His unit is shipping out soon, destination unknown. He jokes about missing harvest season, but I can hear the worry in his words. The tractor is working perfectly, finished the North 40 in half the time it would have taken with the horses. July 20th, 1942. Terrible news. Bill's plane went down over the Pacific. No survivors. Sarah hasn't stopped crying. I don't know how to tell Tom when he writes. My hands trembled as I read these entries. Great-grandpa had had brothers I never knew about, brothers who had died in World War II. The family history I thought I knew was incomplete, missing crucial chapters that explained so much about the man who had raised my grandfather. Chapter 6. The Weight of Loss. The journal entries from late 1942 painted a picture of a young man struggling with grief and responsibility. As I continued reading, the story of the buried tractor began to make sense. August 10th, 1942. Got word that Tom is missing in action somewhere in Italy. The army says they're still looking, but Sarah and I both know what missing usually means. I keep work in the fields, but everything reminds me of my brothers. Tom helped me pick out the tractor. Bill was so excited about the hydraulic lift system. September 27th, 1942. Harvest is done. Best crop we've ever had, thanks to the new tractor. But what's the point? Tom and Bill will never see the farm prosper. Sometimes I think about selling everything and joining up myself, but Sarah needs me here. October 15th, 1942. Official word came today. Tom died in a field hospital in Sicily. Both my brothers are gone. I can't bear to look at the tractor anymore. Every time I start it up, I hear Tom laughing about the sound of the two-cylinder engine. Sounds like a heartbeat, he used to say. The entries became sporadic after that, filled with grief and a young man's struggle to find meaning in loss. But the entry that explained everything came in late November. November 28th, 1942. Made my decision. Can't use the tractor anymore. Too many memories of Tom and Bill. But I can't sell it either. It's the last thing Tom touched before he left for the war. Decided to preserve it, bury it safe until someday when the pain isn't so fresh. Maybe my children or grandchildren will understand why I had to do this. November 30th, 1942. Buried the John Deere today behind the barn. Drained all the fluids, greased everything, wrapped it in canvas. It's like burying my brothers all over again, but I know it's the right thing to do. Someday when someone finds it, they'll know that Tom and Bill Jameson lived and dreamed and loved this farm. I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. Great-grandpa hadn't just buried a tractor. He had created a memorial to his lost brothers, a time capsule of love and grief that had waited 80 years for discovery. Chapter 7. Family Secrets. The revelation about Tom and Bill left me reeling. How had their existence been erased from family history? I called my grandmother immediately, reading her the journal entries over the phone. There was a long silence before she spoke. "Oh, Jake, I wondered if you might find something like that. Your great-grandfather never talked about his brothers. Not once in all the years I knew him. But sometimes, late at night, I would hear him crying in his sleep, calling out names I didn't recognize. Why didn't anyone tell me about them? Henry made us promise never to speak of them. He said the pain was too much, that talking about them would only make it worse. After a while, it became easier to pretend they had never existed. But I think that's why he left the farm to you." "What do you mean?" "You're the only one who ever asked questions about the old days, who wanted to know the real stories. Henry always said you had the curiosity to uncover the truth, even the painful parts. I think he wanted someone to find that tractor and learn about Tom and Bill." That evening, I continued reading through the journal and the other papers in the crate. I found letters from Tom and Bill, written from training camps and overseas posts. Their personalities came alive through their words. Tom, the serious older brother who worried about the farm. Bill, the joker who could find humor in any situation. There were also photographs I had never seen before. Tom and Bill standing beside the new tractor, grinning with pride. The three brothers working together in the fields, their faces tanned and happy. A family portrait that included parents I had only heard mentioned in passing. Each discovery added depth to the story, painting a picture of a close-knit family torn apart by war. Great-grandpa had been the sole survivor, carrying the weight of loss and the responsibility of preserving their memory. I understood now why he had buried the tractor. It wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of dreams interrupted, of a future that would never be. But it was also a testament to love and the hope that someday someone would care enough to uncover the truth. Chapter 8. The restoration begins. With the mystery of the buried tractor solved, I faced a new decision. The machine had been preserved as a memorial to Tom and Bill, but it had also been waiting for someone to bring it back to life. I decided that the best way to honor all three brothers was to restore the tractor to working condition. I had no experience with vintage farm equipment, but I was determined to learn. I contacted local mechanics who specialized in antique tractors, ordered repair manuals, and began the slow process of assessment and restoration. The tractor's condition was better than I had dared hope. Great-grandpa's careful preparation had protected most of the critical components. The engine block was solid, the transmission was intact, and even the electrical system showed signs of life. I started with the basics, cleaning decades of accumulated dirt and grime, checking for rust damage, and cataloging what needed to be repaired or replaced. Each component told a story of 1940s engineering and craftsmanship, built to last and designed for the demanding work of American agriculture. The restoration became a meditation on family history. As I worked on the engine, I thought about Tom's excitement over the hydraulic system. When I cleaned the seat, I imagined Bill joking about the ride quality. Every bolt I turned connected me to the brothers I had never known, but was beginning to understand. I found myself talking to the tractor as I worked, sharing stories about the family they had never met, updating them on how the farm had changed over the decades. It felt natural, as if the machine carried their spirits and was listening to every word. The work was slow and methodical. I wanted to do it right, to honor the care that Great-Grandpa had taken in preserving the machine. Some parts needed to be completely rebuilt, others just needed cleaning and adjustment. I sourced original components whenever possible, maintaining the authenticity that made the tractor special. As winter approached, I had made significant progress. The engine was rebuilt and ready for testing, the hydraulic system was operational, and the distinctive green and yellow paint was being carefully restored to its original luster. Chapter 9. Bringing it back to life. Spring brought the moment I had been working toward all winter, the first attempt to start the restored tractor. I had rebuilt the engine completely, replaced worn parts, and checked every system multiple times. But there's always uncertainty when trying to bring an 80-year-old machine back to life. I invited my grandmother and Uncle Jim to witness the moment. Despite his initial disappointment about not inheriting the farm, Jim had become fascinated by the restoration project and had offered valuable advice throughout the winter. "Your great-grandfather would be amazed," Grandma said, running her hand along the restored fender. "It looks exactly like it did when he bought it new." I had spent weeks getting the fuel system ready, cleaning the carburetor, and ensuring that everything was properly adjusted. The moment of truth came when I climbed onto the seat, set the controls, and reached for the starting crank. The first few attempts produced only coughs and sputters, but gradually the engine began to catch. On the fourth try, the distinctive two-cylinder heartbeat that Tom had loved so much filled the air. The tractor was alive again, running smoothly and powerfully after 8 decades of silence. Tears ran down my grandmother's face as she listened to the engine. "That sound," she whispered. "Henry used to hum along with it when he worked in the garden. I never understood why until now." I let the engine warm up, checking gauges and listening for any signs of trouble. Everything sounded perfect. The restoration had been successful. But more than that, I felt a profound connection to the past, to the young men who had worked this same machine before heading off to war. Uncle Jim shook his head in amazement. "I never thought I'd hear that old two-cylinder song again. There's nothing quite like it." As I drove the tractor around the farmyard for the first time, I could almost feel Tom and Bill riding along, proud that their memorial had been brought back to life. The machine that had been buried in grief was now a celebration of their memory and their dreams. Chapter 10. Sharing the story. Word of the restored tractor and its remarkable story spread quickly through the farming community. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon I was receiving calls from historians, collectors, and other families who had lost members in World War II. The Iowa Historical Society asked if they could document the tractor and include it in an exhibit about wartime agriculture. a vintage tractor club, invited me to bring it to their annual show. Most meaningfully, I was contacted by the families of other soldiers who had served with Tom and Bill, people who remembered the Jameson brothers and wanted to share their own stories. Through these connections, I learned more about Tom and Bill's military service. Tom had been a sergeant in the 34th Infantry Division, killed while helping evacuate wounded soldiers in Sicily. Bill had been a tail gunner on a B-24 bomber, shot down during a mission over the Pacific. Both had been awarded posthumous medals for their service. I decided to create a permanent memorial at the farm. Using the restored tractor as the centerpiece, I established a small museum in one of the outbuildings, displaying the photographs, letters, and artifacts I had discovered. The exhibit told the complete story of the three Jameson brothers and their connection to the land. The memorial became a destination for school groups studying World War II history and for families researching their own military heritage. Visitors often commented on how the story brought the war's impact on rural America into sharp focus. "It's one thing to read about the war in textbooks," a high school teacher told me. "It's another thing entirely to see how it affected individual families and communities." I began giving talks at local historical societies and veterans organizations, sharing the story of the buried tractor and what it represented. Each telling helped me understand more deeply the weight of loss that Great-Grandpa had carried and the courage it had taken to preserve his brother's memory. The farm itself had been transformed by the discovery. What had once been just inherited property was now a living memorial to family sacrifice and the enduring power of love. Chapter 11. A New Purpose. As the first anniversary of finding the tractor approached, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I resigned from my software engineering job and committed to staying on the farm permanently. The discovery of Tom and Bill's story had changed my perspective on what constituted a meaningful life. The corporate world that had once seemed so important now felt hollow compared to the deep connections I had found to family, land, and history. I began farming the land again, using both modern equipment and the restored 1942 John Deere for appropriate tasks. There was something profoundly satisfying about working the same fields that 3 generations of Jamesons had cultivated, continuing a tradition that had been interrupted but never broken. The Memorial Museum grew as more people contributed artifacts and stories. I established a scholarship fund for local students studying agriculture or military history, funded by donations from visitors and the modest income from the farm operations. Uncle Jim became my mentor in farming, teaching me the practical skills that couldn't be learned from books. "Your great-grandfather would be proud," he told me one evening, as we watched the sunset from the farmhouse porch. "You've brought life back to this place in ways he never could have imagined." I started a blog documenting the ongoing restoration of other equipment found on the property and the stories behind each piece. The farm became a destination for people interested in agricultural history and vintage machinery, creating a community of enthusiasts who shared knowledge and passion for preserving the past. Most importantly, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from my previous life. Every day brought new discoveries, sometimes physical artifacts, sometimes stories from visitors who had connections to the area's history. The farm had become a living laboratory for understanding how individual lives intersected with larger historical events. The 1942 John Deere continued to run perfectly, a testament to both the quality of its original construction and the care that had been taken in its preservation and restoration. Chapter 12. Legacy Preserved. 2 years after uncovering the buried tractor, I received a letter that brought the story full circle. It was from a woman in California whose grandfather had served with Tom Jameson in Italy. She had seen the museum's website and wanted to share photographs and letters that mentioned Tom. Among the materials she sent was a letter Tom had written to his grandfather just weeks before his death. In it, he described his hopes for returning to the farm after the war and his excitement about the new tractor that would help modernize their operations. "I can't wait to see how much work we can get done with that John Deere," he had written. "Henry says it's the future of farming, and I believe him. When this war is over, we're going to build something special on that land." Reading Tom's words, I realized that in a way, his dreams had come true. The farm was thriving again, the tractor was working as intended, and the land was being cared for by family. It had just taken 80 years longer than anyone had expected. The memorial had evolved into something greater than I had originally envisioned. It had become a place where people could connect with their own family histories and understand the sacrifices made by previous generations. School groups, veterans organizations, and history enthusiasts regularly visited to learn and remember. I had also begun working with other families to help them research and preserve their own agricultural and military heritage. The skills I had developed in uncovering the Jameson brothers' story proved valuable in helping others discover their own hidden histories. The 1942 John Deere had become more than a restored antique. It was a working symbol of continuity and remembrance. I used it regularly for appropriate farm tasks, maintaining the connection between past and present that Tom and Bill would have appreciated. As I worked the fields with their tractor, I often thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. Great-grandpa's decision to bury the machine, his choice to leave the farm to me, my curiosity about the overgrown area behind the barn. Each step had been necessary to bring the story to light. Chapter 13. Full Circle. Today, as I write this story, the 1942 John Deere sits in the barn where it belongs, ready for tomorrow's work. The Memorial Museum welcomes hundreds of visitors each year, and the Scholarship Fund has helped dozens of young people pursue their educational dreams. I've learned that family history is rarely as simple as we think it is. The stories we tell ourselves about the past are often incomplete, missing crucial chapters that explain who we really are and where we came from. Great-grandpa's silence about his brothers wasn't meant to erase their memory. It was his way of protecting himself from pain that never fully healed. But silence can also rob us of understanding and connection. By uncovering Tom and Bill's story, I gained not just knowledge about my family's past, but insight into the experiences that shaped Great-grandpa's character and values. His quiet strength, his dedication to the land, and his careful preservation of important things all made sense in the context of loss and survival. The farm continues to evolve while honoring its history. I've installed solar panels to power the museum and implement sustainable farming practices that would have impressed the environmentally conscious farmers of earlier generations. The old and new coexist comfortably, each informing and strengthening the other. Visitors often ask if I ever regret leaving my career in technology to become a farmer and historian. The answer is always no. This work feels like what I was meant to do, a calling that was waiting for me to be ready to answer it. The 1942 John Deere runs as smoothly today as it did when Tom and Bill first operated it 80 years ago. Its two-cylinder heartbeat continues to echo across the fields, a sound that connects past and present in an unbroken chain of family dedication to the land. Sometimes, late in the evening when the work is done, I sit on the farmhouse porch and listen to that distinctive engine sound carrying across the fields. In those moments, I feel the presence of all the Jamesons who have worked this land, Great-grandpa Henry, his brothers Tom and Bill, and all the generations who came before and will come after. The buried tractor taught me that the most important discoveries aren't always the ones we're looking for. Sometimes they're waiting patiently beneath the surface, ready to reveal themselves when we're finally prepared to understand their significance. Thank you for listening to this story of discovery, family, and the power of preserving our history. The 1942 John Deere continues to work the same fields where Tom and Bill Jameson once dreamed of their future, proving that some legacies are too important to stay buried forever. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and if you have any similar stories about uncovering hidden family history. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories about the discoveries that connect us to our past and shape our understanding of who we are.